Hi everyone. Thanks for watching the video here. I'm joined here. I'm Trip Jennings, Executive Director of New Mexico In Depth. I'm joined by Managing Editor Marjorie Childress.
Everyone.
Uh, what's that?
I said, hi, everyone.
Oh, yes. Hi everyone. It's a Friday morning, and so I'm still waking up. I don't know about Marjorie, but that's I can't. So that's what that was. So hi everyone. Um, So we're here to talk about two stories that we published in the last few days. Just know that, guys, that the legislature is starting next week. We'll be there covering stuff, and these two stories that we're going to talk about on alcohol and on poverty that were published, they do intersect with the 2025 legislative session. But we're here just mainly to talk about the stories that were reported and written by Ted Alcorn. Ted, as you may know, as you follow our stuff, wrote a very long series in late 2022 or mid 2022, I should say, that really started the legislature debating on how to reduce alcohol harm in the state. New Mexico it leads in basically alcohol related deaths, leads the nation. So, Marjorie, maybe we can talk about some of the major findings of this story. It really is about continuing negotiations on how
hmm
to raise the price of alcohol through taxation and
hmm
how to do that best.
Yeah,
Um,
so I think it would be worth just saying that. So in the reporting that Ted did in 2022, which was this very comprehensive look at alcohol and how it's the high rate of deaths in New Mexico, alcohol related deaths, which include chronic illnesses, as well as how alcohol factors into violence and car wrecks and that sort of thing. New Mexico just has a super high rate of those kinds of deaths. And a whole piece in his reporting, which I recommend everyone go and read, it's on our website. We called it Blind Drunk. And some of that's kind of in some ways alludes to the fact that one of our major findings is that there seems to be kind of an apathetic or just sit on your hands kind of attitude about how to intervene in alcohol harms. I mean, not by everybody, of course. There are some really committed people out there working in this area, but when it comes to at the state policy level, how to really dial back this really high rate of deaths, it just seems like no action really. So and then he put together one of the articles in the story. He called from talking to a wide range of people and reading a lot of the, just kind of um, literature on best practices and whatnot, some recommendations around that people have around how to do this, how to dial back the death rate. And, it's really like an all of society approach. But one of the key interventions in it is to raise the price of alcohol. And one way you can do that is through tax policy. You can raise taxes on alcohol. And by raising the price of alcohol, reduce consumption. And I'm saying this because I do think it's important for us to when we have this debate around alcohol tax policy, to remember that there's a lot of different interventions out there around how to care for people who may be struggling with alcohol addiction or to reduce alcohol related deaths. It's not a be all end all, but a lot of experts say, including the World Health Organization, the folks at the World Health Organization, that it's a key intervention is trying to raise the price to lower consumption. And so that
yeah,
debate
this is
was
backed
really
by
kicked
research
off.
and
Yeah.
this is backed by scholarship and research over,
Mhm.
several decades, actually.
Yeah. And so
Um,
there
and
have been, in particular, one lawmaker comes to mind in particular, people working to do this for a while in New Mexico. And there was a big effort in 2017 to raise alcohol taxes that just kind of crashed and burned at the state house. Um, And I think that our reporting was integral to kickstarting a coalition, a pretty impactful coalition that has been working diligently to get um, taxes on alcohol in our state raised. And they're pointing out, they center what Ted found in his reporting, which is that New Mexico, the taxes on alcohol in New Mexico have not risen at the rate of inflation. So they haven't risen at all in like because alcohol is
30 years, 30
on
years.
volume. It's taxed on volume sold. It's not taxed on pricing. So when prices go up, taxes don't also go up. So it's just kind of been this stagnant. And as prices on alcohol have gone up, taxes have stayed really low. So basically, there's room for growth there by this
Mhm.
analysis.
Mhm. And it seems like lawmakers are receptive to many lawmakers, not all, are receptive to raising the tax. Really, it's how to raise the tax, where to put the onus of the tax. And in the past two, what, 2023, 24, the past two sessions, there have been competing proposals. One would have
Mhm.
placed the tax would have increased the tax at the wholesale level, and it would raise the tax from, like, right now it's about 4 cents on beer and 7 cents on liquor. It would have raised the tax by 25 cents on both of those, which generated a lot of opposition from the industry, but also lawmakers and others. Then there was a competing proposal that came in and said, "Hey, look, no, you know what? We really should change the structure of how the tax is levied on alcohol, and we should actually place it on retailers and make it based on pricing. Therefore, maybe 3% of the price. Uh, and the thinking is the more expensive liquor, I'm sorry, alcohol, which could be liquor or whatever else, would require the person buying the more expensive alcohol to pay more, and the people buying, less expensive alcohol paying less, which is in um, tax debates and whatnot. And when you talk about taxes, that's making the tax more progressive instead of regressive. Regressive means that poor people pay, low income people pay. No, yeah, no,
Yeah, I mean, I that is the argument. I mean,
yeah,
I
yeah.
don't,
So
I mean, I think it's problematic. I mean, it is problematic because nothing prevents someone who drinks a lot, if there's a retail price and it's pushing up the price of alcohol at the retail level, for higher levels of higher, more expensive beverages, to
mhm,
just downgrade to less expensive beverages. So I don't
mhm,
know, I don't know if the poor person distinction holds there, but,
mhm, mhm. Okay,
um,
yeah, yeah,
I
yeah,
mean, it
and
probably does. I mean, it probably does for people who are really poor and buying, um, really inexpensive alcohol. But I mean, I'm just saying there's probably a lot of people who might just move their spending to less expensive alcohol.
I mean that is part of the debate. Actually, that is
It's
that
part of the
is
debate.
actually that is a criticism of the the tax proposals by some in the industry, actually, which is like you're not really going to stop the consumption. So there is this really robust debate right
There's a
now.
robust debate.
Yeah, research around, like, research that shows that actually if you do raise taxes, the consumption goes down. Industry says, well, that's not necessarily true, because actually just what you said, which is, hey, you know what? People will move to it's just a
I mean,
debate. I'm not.
industry and certain lawmakers, and
Yeah, yeah. Right.
one of the stumbling blocks to this retail price proposal alone, if it's alone, if it's getting rid of the wholesale tax and raising the retail and just putting it on retail, one of the one of the pushbacks on that is that it would actually lower, or it may actually lower the price of cheaper alcohols while it raises the price of more expensive alcohol. So the idea is, and there are people like
Right.
Senator Antoinette Sedillo Lopez who said it's a she in talking about this aspect of it. she said it was a moral issue for her that we couldn't do something that would actually lower the cost of inexpensive alcohol. But I feel like the so-called hybrid approach that's being talked about, and I think
Their
that
third proposal,
all
yeah,
of the,
this
yeah,
is a
all
new
of the
proposal.
lawmakers seem to be headed in this direction, is to go in the direction of a retail tax and think about maybe slightly raising the wholesale tax or keeping the wholesale tax itself just where it's at, so that there isn't like this floor that go where it like the floor goes down.
So, yeah, the hybrid proposal, this is something that Ted found in his story, which is we've had the two competing proposals in the past. There's some negotiations around a new hybrid bill that would combine certain elements, right? And that's what folks are going to be talking about
Hmm.
this session.
Yeah. And
Okay.
then, connected to that is, the idea here is it will raise additional revenue. And I guess one of the big questions is to what degree. Like some of the lawmakers want to really go there and raise a lot of revenue. They see an opportunity to really raise a lot of revenue, and other lawmakers are kind of tempering that a little bit. But there would be I there would be additional revenue raised, and then it becomes a question of how do you spend that revenue? Is it going to be revenue that is targeted towards alcohol prevention, or is it going to go in the general fund? So there's good tax policy principles where you say it goes into the general fund, because the more and more you carve out revenue and, cut it up and dedicate it to certain things, the more holes there are in your budget, like in your revenue stream. So there's all kinds of debates around that too. Like, should it just go into the general fund, which is where alcohol money goes now? It
Yeah, and
doesn't.
we should say for folks maybe who haven't read the story, this hybrid proposal would generate 200 to 260 million dollars.
Well, it depends on, yeah, the one side's hybrid proposal, what
Yeah.
one is, and then there has been lawmakers who've said they're uncomfortable or uneasy,
Hmm.
that it makes them uneasy to think about that large of a tax bill.
In the
Or
past,
even
yeah, that's right.
taxes. Yeah,
And
so
so,
I am.
so I just want to put the figure out there so people would,
Mhm.
so when you say added revenue, it's 200 million to 260 million, at least the estimate. And then there are also questions if that does in fact pass, how is the money divvied up? And there's
Mhm.
some proposals that would, put maybe divert a quarter of it to tribal community, the indigenous communities, right? Indigenous population, culturally sensitive
Mhm.
kind of programs and whatnot. Because what Ted's reporting has found, and state, folks have this data too, is that indigenous folks drink less than Anglos, but they die at a higher rate than Anglos. So there would be that kind of there are questions about tax policy, but then after, if it does pass, how do you divvy it up, right? It's a
Mhm.
really there are a lot of weeds here that you have to get
Oh
through.
yeah, it's super interesting, but it's interesting to see now that we're going into the third year where this is debated in the interim committee period, which is the meetings that lawmakers have between sessions. Towards the end of last year, basically the chair of the tax committee said, this is we're letting the alcohol industry know this is coming. This is going to be a standalone bill. It's not going to be wrapped into the larger tax bill that we do. This is going to be a standalone bill that everyone gets to be part of. So that kind of statement made me think, well, there's some momentum here. When he's weighing in like that, it's like he's going to get behind trying to move a bill beyond his committee into the larger debate at the roundhouse.
We should say that 3 years is not a long time for
Mm-mm.
legislators, lawmakers to be debating something this substantive. It can,
Right.
this is a substantive issue, and sometimes it can take 6, 7, 8, maybe even a decade to pass something. I'm not saying that that's going to be the case here, but I just want the, people who watch this video to understand that 3 years is, you've got a lot of issues to work through. And so, but you're right, it does sound like there is momentum this
Hmm.
session, and it's a it's a really interesting debate because it also, like many interesting substantive debates at a legislature, it brings in so many different questions beyond tax and consumption. It's about you know um, how we respond morally to these kind of things. That's what I
Yeah.
find interesting.
And this is coming at an interesting time. It was something I wrote about in my newsletter a little bit this week. Is this month there's been this, the U.S. Surgeon General came out and said he thought that
Hmm.
a new warning label should be added to alcoholic beverages. So right now, warning labels are around pregnancy and driving on alcohol. He's now come out and said he believes that a warning that Congress should add in statute that a warning label be attached to alcohol saying it causes certain types of cancer. And there's been quite a bit of, writing about that this month. And, it's long been known that cancer is so when you say alcohol related deaths, like there's a big chunk of them are chronic illnesses. And there's, in one of the charts that we did in our original reporting, you see it in their cancer. Um, so it's kind of like there's a larger social debate here around beyond our tax policy debate in New Mexico around how, what is the role alcohol plays in all of our lives. And we also see this broader kind of move towards, by a lot of people, towards embracing non-alcoholic beverages when they're out socializing, and just health in general. So, so the role of alcohol because it just permeates our society. Um, so there's like this broader kind of debate around alcohol and health that all of this is embedded in, which is
Hmm.
fascinating. And but I want to ask you, Trip, and I think we should just talk about this briefly on this subject, is because the legislature can act, but it also the other aspect here is where the governor's at on alcohol tax policy. Where has she been at to date on alcohol tax policy?
In the past, the legislature in 2023 did pass it was a nominal tax increase on
So
alcohol.
1 cent a drink.
Yeah, and she vetoed it, saying that it was just too small. So,
Mm-hmm.
at the same time, if you look at the campaign finance records, this is something that we do at New Mexico in depth, and this is, money and influence are always something that one needs to think about in the legislature. She received a lot of money from the alcohol industry. That is not uncommon for governors. Let me just say that. That is not uncommon.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so, there are questions around, was this her, basically hey, we only get one bite at the apple, which I think was what her office said. We need to make it right. Um, or was it, a little bit of influence? And personally, I don't know the answer to that question.
I don't know. I mean, the alcohol lobby is robust in New Mexico, as I think it is nationally across
Yeah, yeah.
state. I mean, there's the companies, there's the wholesale companies, there's the restaurants, there's the gas stations. I mean, alcohol has a robust lobby.
Hmm.
And so I don't know across the board. I mean, they give a lot of money to lawmakers too.
Yeah, yeah, they do. That's right.
So
And
but
and and,
she's
and
kind of like to me, I don't feel like she's been a real champion here. She hasn't said
she's
much
not been out front.
about it.
She's not really, this has not been one of her priorities. This is
Yeah.
not something that she's championed. Now, I would say that, we as journalists say that not knowing 100% what's going on behind closed doors. There's that
Right.
caveat. But publicly, and we kind of know this issue pretty well. She has not been a champion. And I want to say, look, if you guys want to delve a little deeper, go to nmindepth.com. That's where you can see the story. And
Hmm.
another thing that Ted said, we probably should have said this earlier, is that here's a number that gives you a sense of when we say we're high, we lead the nation in alcohol-related deaths. In 2023, there were 1,900 New Mexicans, people who lived here, who died of alcohol-related deaths. I believe the story said, as I recall, that's double the national rate. So that gives you a sense, at least in data,
Hmm.
of what we're talking about. that this is a serious issue. And there are, beyond the sponsors of the legislation, the people who are negotiating, there are people in the legislature who recognize that. There are people also who are pushing against, raising taxes. Um, but there are, beyond the sponsors, there does seem to be some receptivity. Um, I wonder now, we have not exhausted this topic. We could probably talk about this for 7 or 8 hours because we've
Yeah.
done so much editing and reporting on this over the last 3 years. But I'm not sure we would keep all of you in this video if we were there for 7, 8 hours, and we would have to break for lunch and everything else. But I think we want to move on, right? Don't you think? Maybe it's about
Yeah.
time to move on to the second story, which also is really interesting. It's about poverty and the tax structure. And look, these two bills, I mean, these two issues, sorry, subjects, are intertwined, right, Marjorie? Because in the alcohol debate, there is some conversation about reforming some parts of the tax code. We've talked about making, some people on the alcohol side, on one side of the alcohol debate, wanting to maybe have a more progressive tax, making high-end user, whatever you want to call it.
Same people, so it's the same committee that is in the driver's seat on, so it's the House Tax Committee, and every year the House Tax Committee is kind of the one that pushes forward what they call the omnibus tax bill. And then it goes over to the Senate, but the House Tax Committee really grapples with the big bill that they try to pass every year, kind of, so just generally speaking. And over the last 5, 6 years, um, this committee has made a concerted effort uh, to change our tax structure so that it's more progressive, which means wealthier people pay a higher share of their income in taxes than lower income people do.
And it's not just
And
this committee. The context is important as far as the overall
yeah,
legend.
so the same people who are engaged in this debate around alcohol taxes, who are really they're looking at are also kind of the people who've been very involved in trying to make New Mexico's tax structure more progressive, so that lower income people don't pay a higher share of their income in taxes than wealthy people do. And so I think the alcohol tax and the debate over retail versus wholesale is part of this thinking. And it's people trying to figure out, this has been a real effort of ours to lessen the burden of taxation on poor people, because of the high poverty rate in our state in particular. Um, and Ted did some reporting about analysis out there that's saying actually their efforts or a change in our tax structure over the last 5, 6 years or so really has lifted people out of poverty. So they're the same, it's the same people having this debate. And I think that we need to try to like recognize that some of these conversations around retail versus wholesale are in service to this other project, which is a big project, that a group of progressive lawmakers mainly have really driven forward.
And the context is that from 2018 through 2024, both chambers in the New Mexico legislature have become more progressive because really
Mhm,
that's the context, which is the committee is operating in that context, which is
mhm,
basically you've got progressive leadership in the House, progressive Democratic leadership in the House and in the Senate, and you have more lawmakers who are progressive who have joined them. If the tax committee would have tried to do this I'm just speaking from experience, covering Richardson's days, I'm not sure it would have worked. Because
right.
Richardson actually he reformed, changed the income tax structure,
Yeah.
and he probably would not have been okay with this. So
Yeah, he kind of, I mean, it's all about the time that you're in too. I
yeah,
mean,
yeah.
that's going back 20 years ago. And yeah, I mean, he flattened our tax structure he really reduced taxes on wealthy people. big time. His Blue Ribbon Tax Commission's recommendations, they just kind of slashed higher income taxes. And so this particular legislature that we have today, they haven't increased them to what they were before,
No,
but
no,
they've
that's right.
inched up, they've just barely inched up tax rates on the wealthiest New Mexicans, and they've reduced them on the lowest income New Mexicans, and made a bunch of other adjustments, like tax credits, the child
Yeah.
tax credit, the low income rebate. They've the working families tax credit. They've done a bunch of different things that have taken the lowest income New Mexicans to where they now pay, when you consider all of the tax changes, they pay a lower rate than wealthy people, a lower share than wealthy people of their own
Hmm.
income.
Hmm.
There's still, and I think we need to say this, because middle income New Mexicans, the ones in the middle, are still paying a higher share of their income in taxes than the wealthiest New Mexicans pay. Something
Hmm.
tells me that the work of this committee, this project they've undertaken, is going to continue to tackle that. Um, so
Yeah, yeah.
Ted wrote a whole comprehensive story laying out all the changes that they've made. Um, and
And folks, if you want to go again to
Mhm,
nminDepth.com, there's a handy dandy chart that actually shows you year by year all the changes
mhm.
that have been made that Marjorie was talking about. Tax credits, all this kind of stuff, expanding, creating one or two tax credits, but also expanding tax credits. And credits, we should say for folks, maybe who don't know this, is credit. Unlike a deduction or an exemption, credit is like you make so much revenue, then you take off, what you actually send to the, like, what the analysis is. If you earn $90,000 and you get a $3,000 credit, it's like $87,000 or whatever. That's what a credit is versus a deduction or exemption. So, so they've done that. They've also, in the income tax thing, there have been some movements Richardson was when before Richardson became governor, it was 8.2% on income tax, personal income tax for the highest earners, 4.9% for the lowest, and it was progressive. What I mean is there were increments depending on how you earned. Then it became like you said, flat 4.9%. I believe the legislature in the past 6 years has raised the top earners at a certain threshold
They've
from
inched it up.
5.9,
I mean, it's not like what it was, but
5.9, right? I think
yeah,
that's right.
it's gone up. Hmm.
There's not a total restructuring where a lot of this stuff has happened. Is like you were talking about the credits and deductions and things. I'm sorry, credits. Yeah. Like, and I have
Hmm.
worker, is it working families tax credit, low income tax credit, I think, as I recall from
Well,
reading.
it's a child tax credit,
Hmm.
and I'm looking at expanding that this year. And then they also have this thing called a low income tax rebate,
Yes.
lifter. Um,
Yes.
and That's more of it's like a money back to you. I
And,
mean, it's like,
yeah, the low income comprehensive tax rebate. And it's refundable in the sense that even if you're not earning a ton of money, you can still qualify for it. Um, the new child tax credit. I'm just reading from some of this
oh.
stuff here, uh,
Hmm. So this
which
is
is
in service to making it's in service to making the tax code more progressive, so that so that on a tax level, there's more money in the pockets of low income people. There's other things they've done too, that like they've expanded early childhood education opportunity, like broadly.
yes.
They're trying to push the progressives are trying to pass a paid family medical leave act that would
Mhm.
allow people up to 12 weeks. I haven't read the new proposal to see if they've scaled this back, but last year it was up to 12 weeks off to care for medical issues in your family. So they've done some other things too to help um, working families, lower income families grapple with the costs of living. And the at the national level, so there was some analysis that came out around New Mexico's poverty rate. And this is kind of what Ted wrote about is if you look at just the official poverty rate that just looks at income earned, New Mexico has long been one of the touted as one of the poorest states in the nation. Like we've got one of the worst poverty rates in the nation. But if you look at it through the lens of if you add in all of these government supports around uh,
Benefits. Yeah.
credits and tax credits in particular, and this low income rebate, the things that put money back in people's pockets. If you look at that, they take all of that and they also, look at things like local tax rates and whatnot and cost of living. It's a formula. They put it all together and they come up with what they call the supplemental poverty rate. And there was
Mhm.
this analysis that came out that shows that New Mexico, if you look at it through the lens of the supplemental poverty rate, New Mexico has just made leaps and bounds since these tax changes started in
Or in
2018.
rankings. In
In
rankings.
rankings, New Mexico has just moved way up. So, the idea is that poverty has really been reduced through
I mean,
these measures.
yes, there is some debate, right, around whether poverty has been reduced in the legislature. Um, the Legislative Finance Committee, which is the budget arm for the legislature, was like, this doesn't really. They were maybe a little. It wasn't skeptical, but they did say that it doesn't really go the long way to all the way to reducing endemic, longstanding poverty. And then, of course, you've got, we
Well,
Ted
it
talked
doesn't
to
provide
Senate
jobs.
Majority. I'm sorry.
It's not about, so they're basically saying really the way you reduce poverty is to create better paying jobs and more
Yeah,
of them.
right.
Like it's about jobs, right? So
Which is
government
another
programs aren't
large.
really going to um reduce poverty. Well,
And,
I
and
mean,
that's coming. Ted also spoke to the Republican Senate Minority Leader, and he kind of said the same thing.
mhm.
It's one of these things where the reason I mentioned this is there is a debate around how effective this is. Now the Democratic leaders, legislative leaders, and many folks say that this is really important, and it has reduced poverty, and it does go a long way. And frankly, it's not an easy fix. It's going to take a long time. So I just threw that in there because this, like the alcohol debate, and in many ways, this is a much larger debate, um, is fascinating. It's
Yeah,
really.
and there's an element here of where you have data, right? And data shows, and where the supplemental poverty rate, these new numbers on our supplemental poverty rate comes from looking at data. I mean, people who are data scientists or people who really know how to look at data at your fingertips. And that would say that if you add in to like just an income measure, if you add in all of these other benefits that you're getting through the tax code, that people at the lowest income people have more money, cash in their pocket. They have more, so it has reduced poverty. It's like a actual data shows this, but then there's the lived reality on the ground. And this kind of, maybe we wondered if there's a disconnect or people really feeling it on the ground.
Mhm, mhm,
And Ted kind of explored that a little bit in his story too. And he talked
mhm.
to a woman who makes around $30,000 a year. She has children. She really struggles to get by. And, she might have noticed the tax credits, but to her, she can barely keep her roof over her head. The housing costs are so high, inflation, life is still a struggle for her, a real struggle. So, the question is, well, do people who are getting these benefits, do they really know that they no longer live in poverty, And I think that's how that's really important to think about the actual perception that people have around this stuff.
That was that added a lot of nuance and insight, I
Hmm.
thought, to the story. We also need to say this. Um, the reason that New Mexico can, at least they can do this, is because for the last 7 years or so, New Mexico has been, except for COVID really put a crimp to the revenue coming in, but historic revenue from the oil and gas industry. So they've
Yeah.
been swimming in so much money that generally,
Mhm.
what I've observed over the years is when a state is doing well economically, um, there's not a lot of anger coming from, the population of like, what are you doing? And so I think that, you've had this the rise, the expansion of the caucus of progressive lawmakers in the legislature. You have a Democratic governor, and you also have historic revenues,
Mhm.
and all those come at the same time. And this has allowed them to pursue a more progressive agenda around this stuff. If we were
Yeah, I mean,
really
we're,
tough times, if we were really in tough times, the debate might be different.
yeah, it might be. I mean, so sometimes I think people, we probably need to wrap up, but I do want to just say sometimes when we talk about this, when we talk about a progressive tax code and then the progressive wing of the, those are two separate things.
Mm-hmm.
And when people talk about a progressive tax code, that is, it has a real meaning to it. And the counter is what they call regressive
Mm-hmm.
tax code. And it's about low income people not paying a higher share of all the money at their disposal in taxes than the share that wealthy people pay of their income that they have. It's about fairness across the tax structure. And, I think there's like kind of middle of the road organizations that would argue that New Mexico needed to just pursue policies that work on their tax structure to alleviate that what's happening there. And one way you can do that is raise revenue somewhere else. I mean, it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't necessarily have to be attached to how much money you have coming in.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's about changing the actual structure of the tax code so that low income people don't have a higher burden of
Mm-hmm.
taxes.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and
And that's
I so then when we talk about progressives pursuing this, yeah, it tends to be a progressive priority.
well, I mean that
If
that
people,
is one of the animating, ideas of progressive, that whatever you want to call in politics, progressive, which is, basically lifting the onus off of lower income taxpayers,
Mhm.
asking higher income payers to pay more. And you can do this. What's fascinating is that, in many ways, the tax code is like a hidden budget. There's a lot of stuff that's really interesting
There's a lot of
there.
stuff you can do.
Yeah, you can do that. And we've been reporting on that. Sorry, guys. This is another subject where we could talk for 7, 8 hours because we've been reporting on the tax structure for so long in New Mexico,
Mhm.
through tax expenditure budgets and all this other stuff. So if you've made it to the end here, we
We are going
really
to continue
thank you.
covering this. We're going to
Yes.
continue kind of paying attention to the tax conversation, obviously through the lens of alcohol, potentially through some more of these types of initiatives. And we are going to have weekly chats like we did last year, where we invite other journalists to join us, and we'll invite you guys as well, whoever wants to join us, and we'll send out an email probably early next week, letting people know how they can sign up for those so they can get a link to join us on the Zoom. Um, and at some point, we'll get them started probably after opening day next Tuesday.
Yeah.
Um, and we'll probably be a little bit more targeted and have room to answer questions and whatnot. So,
Yeah. So again, gold star to everybody who's made it through I think 38 minutes or 37 minutes or whatever. And look for that email from us about, doing or listening to watching us talk about these issues through the legislative session. Thank you so much for joining us, and we will see you guys later.